You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Sean Brodrick, natural resource specialist at the Oxford Club. His website, investmentu.com, U being the letter U. Welcome to the show, Sean.
Thanks very much for having me on.
China says its manufacturing output has fallen again. How bad of a message is that for the rest of the world's economy?
Well, I can see why people are scared by this. After all, China consumes a vast amount of global resources. And if they're not consuming those resources, that really weighs on commodities which are already in some serious trouble. However, one thing I would point out is that China isn't sitting on its hands. The Chinese government has really taken steps to boost its economy. I mean, it has done things like unveiled a new spending program. It also is going after all these millions and millions of dollars that all these local governments were sitting on, basically because they were afraid to spend the money for a bunch of reasons that I could go into. It has taken that money away and it's going to spend it itself. Finally, it's streamlining, merging, and sometimes closing down its big state-owned companies, so to make those much more efficient. So I do think that the Chinese economy is in some trouble, but it's not insurmountable. And so I think we might be looking at an opportunity here and not the death knell.
Is there any particular area you think will bounce back first?
That's a good question. I've actually turned more positive on gold recently. I think part of it might be that people are more worried about the global economy, and so they're thinking of, gold as a safe haven. Plus, there's the fact that I don't think the Fed's going to raise interest rates anytime this year. It's often assumed that when the Fed, and by the Fed I mean the U.S. Federal Reserve, of course, when the Fed raises interest rates, well, that will hurt gold because gold doesn't pay any interest. But the Fed really had an opportunity to raise rates. Everyone expected it to. Well, I didn't expect it to, but I mean, many people on the street did. It did not. Now it's giving lip service to raising rates in October. I don't think it will. I don't think it'll raise in December. Frankly, with the way that it's worried about deflation and the problems we've seen overseas, I don't expect the Fed to raise interest rates at all next year. I don't expect an interest rate next year and maybe on into 2017. So we could be a long time at these rates. The market hasn't really realized it yet, but it had a brief shock when the Fed did not raise rates. Then things started going back to normal. I think there could be more shocks coming that way, but those are the kinds of things that can help send gold higher. So I like gold and I like miners here. Select miners, of course.
Have the miners who weren't very productive been shaken out yet?
We keep seeing more and more things going on. I think that there's still room for bad news. I mean, just earlier this month, we heard about 3 big mines in Africa that actually produce copper being shut down. I think we could see more of that in gold as, some companies just hit the limit of what they can actually do. But as long as you can find a company that can make money at current prices, Barrick Gold would be an example. They have production costs in the 800s, and they keep lowering costs. Well, then they should really do fine. And there are lots of smaller miners, too, that can actually make money at current levels and keep up exploration and still do what they need to do. They've adjusted. And a lot of that has to do with, falling fuel prices. That certainly helps companies a lot. But also there has been kind of deflation in things like equipment costs and in labor costs. So there's a lot of things going on in the broad market that are actually helping companies out. That's not to say it's a painless adjustment. It's quite painful for many companies. But I think you can pick and choose your survivors here. And if you have an eye on the longer term, you don't need immediate gratification. Now's a fine time to pick up some good bets in this area.
With the stock market wavering, people expected more action in gold. Why hasn't it happened yet?
Well, I mean, a lot is really depending. I would say that market has been beaten so much for so long that everyone's hesitant to actually step into it, right? I mean, it just has been hurt over and over again We did see gold run up a little bit, but as soon as it ran into overhead resistance, from that big downtrend, immediately the sellers stepped in and they started selling. So it has to work through that. It's a process that will take time, but I think people have been so burned in this market, it's really hard to find any real, unbridled optimism. That said, I would say that we've seen in places like India, they are purchasing a lot more gold. In August, the purchases of gold in India were up 54% year over year, quite a bit. China is always a question, but the gold we've seen move through the Shanghai gold exchange, it's just a lot of gold is really moving through there. So when you look at things, there's not a lot of new supply. And if China and India are starting to heat up again, then that's really going to change the market. And we are getting to the seasonally good time for gold anyway, because these are the big seasons of all these festivals in India and China and stuff like that. So we can look forward to that. So again, I don't expect immediate gratification, but it looks like some kind of bottom has put in. So you can take positions in good companies and see where those bring you. As long as they can make money at current prices, when and if prices go higher, they stand to make a heck of a lot more money.
We'll have more with Sean Brodrick right after the break.
Unbelievable harmonies, spectacular performance, Bird Dog and the Vintage Electric Band, the ultimate tribute to the Everly Brothers and Simon and Garfunkel in Oliver, October 2nd, in Kelowna, October 3rd. Buy online and save at ontourtickets.com. More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Sean Brodrick. Sean, do you see any upbreak or a breakout for oil anytime soon?
No, I'm more bearish on oil. And I have to tell you, it's a mixed opinion at my company, Oxford Club, because some people are quite bullish on oil. I'm just not. It is true that North American production is going down, not only in the U.S., but also Canada. We've just seen, some places, because they aren't drilling as much, the amount of oil they produce is starting to drop. And so that would be a bullish force in the market over time. And also, demand for gasoline is rising. You and I... we actually spoke about this last time, and so these are the bullish forces. That said, over in the Middle East, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, they can produce from now till the cows come home, and there is more production coming online from both Iraq and Iran. And so those are the things we have to watch. Just because I'm not actually, really bullish on oil prices right now. By the way, that doesn't mean that I'm not buying select oil companies. That's the funny thing. If you can find an oil company that can make money at current prices and it pays you a nice dividend, well, you know what? You can pick it up. As long as you don't need immediate gratification, you get paid to wait. Eventually at some point oil price will go higher. So you have to just be very selective about what you pick up. But yeah, I think you can, pick up good companies at dirt cheap prices right now.
I've heard some special funds are being put together right now, actually, to take a look for oil companies in distress.
Yeah, well, that is true, and I've heard that as well. And here's the thing. That can work out very well if you make the right bets, but you shouldn't buy a company just because you think someone's going to buy it. I can't tell you how many times I've stood on a rocky cliff being shown around by some guy who has a gold explorer, and he tells me the story of why his company is going to be bought by, some other bigger company. And the same thing has happened with an oil company as well, only to a lesser degree. And that might be a good thing for funds to do, because they're doing a lot more research. But the individual investor, I wouldn't buy a stock just for that reason. Buy a stock because it's a good company, it makes money, you think it'll make more money, and you think it'll pay you more money. Those are the things that I'd be buying them for, not because, this is right next to some other company and it'll integrate well with them, and so they have to buy it. They don't have to buy anything. That's really the problem.
If somebody was looking for a market that was going up, is Russia a place to take a look at?
I was just looking at them last week. not a bad thing to consider. They're actually holding up pretty well. Funny you should mention Russia, though, because their currency has fallen so much that for oil companies operating in Russia, it's as if oil was priced at around $75 a barrel, because the cost of what they pay in, like, wages and all that stuff has gone down so much that it's actually not a bad place to be for them. That said, Russia is still under sanctions. So any money you're putting to work in Russia, you have to consider it extremely speculative, because what if Vladimir Putin decides to ratchet up international tensions again? Now he's sending tanks into Syria, and I'm not sure whose side he's on at this point. So there could be more sanctions. That's all I'm saying. So, there are opportunities in Russia that look very attractive right now, but we have to keep the geopolitical risks in mind because they definitely exist.
The European migration crisis, how is that affecting the markets?
That is such a horrible thing. I feel bad for those people. I absolutely do. And yet at the same time, you can say, you know what? Saudi Arabia isn't taking in any immigrants, and they're the guys who are fueling the rebellion. If I was someone living in Europe, I would have to just weigh into the balance, what if the jihadists did send somebody in that wave of migrants? I mean, you have to think it's possible. And it's not like the jihadists are complete idiots. I mean, it certainly seems like they do walk down the hallway and end up managing to trip over the wallpaper quite a bit, and thank heaven for that. But I don't know that they pass upon that opportunity. So who is it good for? It is good for those companies in Europe that had a low birth rate, so they don't know where they're going to get new workers, and so you can read Germany into that, of course. I think that's one reason why the Germans are welcoming them with open arms, because Germany has such a low birth rate anyway. It's not exactly good for the workers in Germany, though. And again, I think there are security risks in this. I feel very sorry for those people, but it's not just the decent people that are making the migration. You can bet there'll be some bad eggs. Just a few bad eggs is all it takes when they're willing to commit mass violence. So you can have a mass migration of very decent people, and in there are, some of the criminal element. What the heck are you going to do at that point? So that seems like a can of worms for me. Frankly, I would not be surprised to see some of the governments in Europe shift to anti-immigration governments. Now, you can put those either to the left or the right. Usually they're to the right, but that, again, could affect the fabric of Europe. And so that could be more pressure on the euro, so that would be something to keep in mind.
Right. I mean, countries like Italy, Greece, Spain really can't afford to spend money on immigrants because they have 25 to 50% unemployment already.
Exactly. How can Greece take in immigrants? Now, there has been talk of maybe purchasing some uninhabited Greek island and putting immigrants on them, but those islands are uninhabited for a reason. There's nothing to do there, and I can't imagine that's a good breeding ground for future European citizens at that point, especially if people are being kept isolated. They only turn inward, and it's only the zealots that will actually appeal to people. And again, I'm not saying that most or even a large part of the people coming out of Syria are bad people. Most of them are, they were ordinary people who have had something horrible happen to their lives, and I feel very, very sorry for them. The problem is, we know that bad elements from that region would see that as a golden opportunity to slip in and do something bad. And so I think the first time that happens, you're going to see a huge shift in how Europe treats those migrants, simply because the voting public will demand it.
If that happens, will Canada and the U.S. change their positions on Syria right now, where we have active Air Force action?
Yeah. Well, what are we going to do? I tell you, when I watch the Republican debates, it looks like those guys are spoiling for a war. And one of them certainly could win, in which case we could see boots on the ground over there sooner rather than later, which I guess would be in Iraq and Syria, is that general region, or maybe they attack Iran just on general principles. It's really hard to say. But there are a lot of balls in the air, and a lot could go wrong. But on the other hand, and I would like to point this out, a lot could go right as well. Just because I sometimes spend nights laying awake worrying about this stuff doesn't mean that it has to happen, So things can actually work out fine, and there are a lot of good things for the global economy as well. It's true that China seems to be slowing down a bit. India, they've shaved off exactly how much, their economy will grow. But the estimates are for India to still grow over 7% a year. I mean, that's actually tremendous growth when you get down to it. And so I think a lot of this is fear that's being built into the market that doesn't have to happen. Plenty of good stuff can still happen. And so if the good stuff happens and less of the bad stuff happens, that means that, there are some real bargains out there because things could actually go pretty well.
We have federal politicians in both Canada and the U.S. promising if they're elected, they can make the economy better. Can governments by themselves do that?
No. I mean, you have to make it easier for companies to actually do business. And as much as we hear lip service to that, it's not like Washington hasn't had plenty of chance to do that already. They don't, right? I mean, and I'm sure that's the same thing up in Canada. They have opportunities to do this, but they seem to focus on things that don't really matter to anybody who's outside of the capital, the meat and potatoes issues, I guess because they're not as sexy or glamorous or like what have you. So that will be important. Certainly government policy will be important, and we could see changes that will help one way or the other in the future. That said, I would point out that U.S. full-time employment in August went higher than any time since before the actual big recession, So that just happened. So at least we're on a growth track, not the fastest growth track. In fact, it's an infuriatingly slow growth track. I think that's one thing that's really getting people. But if they really wanted to boost the economy, then they'd start rebuilding all of our falling down bridges and stuff, of which we have an incredible surplus here in the U.S., by the way. We have a bull market in bridges and roads that are falling down. They aren't actually doing that because of different political fights, and also they don't want to raise taxes to do that, which I can understand. And they have their own issues that they're working on. But if you like slow growth, gridlock is a good thing to have because less money is actually spent than when one side or the other actually controls things. And it looks like we're headed for gridlock. Again, I know people get frustrated with that, but if you can live in a low-growth environment, it's not the worst thing to have.
Sean, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Sure. It's always fun. Thanks for speaking to me. And best of luck to everybody in this market. I know it's a little hairy right now, but we should come to, some kind of resolution of these things sooner rather than later. Thanks
again.
Thanks.
My guest has been Sean Brodrick, Natural Resource Specialist at the Oxford Club. His website, investmentu.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be emailed to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.